If you're interested in single parenthood, then this episode is for you. On today's episode, you're going to meet a fantastic human being. Her name is Trisha Cornwell, and she goes by the Single Mama on Instagram. And the reason she says that is because she's not alone. She feels supported by her entire community. And you will find out how she got there, how she overcame so many obstacles, not just about fertility treatment and how she chose a donor and what she thinks about donor related siblings, but also how she deals with her daily life, how she manages stress, how she manages the potential for shame, so many things. I think it will be an enormously helpful episode if this is a subject for you. Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about fertility treatment, donor conception, surrogacy, and all the ways the modern family is built. I'm Lisa Schumann. I'm an author, a researcher, a therapist, and I'm so glad to have you here today to teach you a little bit about being a single mom by choice. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful guest. Her name is Trisha Cornwell, and she is a single mom by choice, but she's also somebody that you're going to have so much warmth for because I do too. And you're going to see why. Not only is she a social impact consultant in her day-to-day life, but she is also a social media influencer for a very good reason, because she helps so many people. She provides people with all sorts of things, life hacks, hacks about home, hacks about childcare and food and all sorts of things. She really helps people who are on this path to parenthood have an easier journey. And so we're so delighted to have her here. Thank you so much for joining, Trisha.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. I'm so excited about this.
Well, I'm so glad that we finally made this work. And even though I haven't met you in person, I've always admired all these wonderful things you do. Obviously, you're a giving, loving person, and you have found a way to have even more love in your life by having a baby on your own. So could you start to tell the audience a little bit about how that came to be, how you decided to take this path?
Yes, I would love to. So I guess I'll first start by saying that I never thought I would be a single mom by choice. I think, like a lot of women, I thought I would get married and kind of have a more traditional path in terms of how I became a mom. But let's see, what year was it? 2018, my mom passed away of colon cancer, and it was
Oh,
a really traumatic experience for my family. And I remember at that time thinking about, like, wow, when I turn 62, like, what do I want to be true in my life? What, like, if I only make it to 62 as well, like, what is the most important thing that I want? And the most important thing to me was, one, I really wanted to be a mom. I knew, like, if I only make it to 62, I know that that's a lived experience I want to have and share with someone. And the second thing is, I want to have an impact in the world and leave this crazy place better than I found it. But I found myself not saying, like, I need to be married, or, I need to have found my life partner by then. And so at the time I was going through this leadership development program. I was in Houston working, and I actually had this executive coach who had become a single mom by choice herself through adoption, not through donor conception. And it was the first time that I ever thought, like, oh, maybe things can go in a different order. Like, maybe life doesn't have to follow the same path that I had always thought.
yeah.
And so, my mom passed away that year, and it was almost like the catalyst of hitting the gas pedal. I had started to think about it. I had just gotten out of a pretty long-term relationship, and I thought, okay, I'm turning 35. I am now, like, have this spotlight on my life around what could happen to me in the future. Maybe I'll live to be 100, but maybe I won't. And I didn't want to waste any time. And so that was really the beginning. Like, I immediately went into research mode. I was like, what are the different pathways to becoming a single mom by choice, through adoption or through donor conception? I knew I wanted to experience pregnancy. And so I thought, I want to start the process through donor conception. If that doesn't work for me, I would consider adoption. But I just
Mhm.
wanted to have that experience being pregnant. And so I started, and I had, went through a pregnancy loss during the process, but about a year and a half after I started, I had my daughter in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. So just kind of
Mm.
going along that theme of, like, nothing comes as you thought it was going to come, and
Yes.
things don't follow the same path. I feel like it was almost like divine intervention that's when she would arrive.
That's amazing. It's making me think about, I was meeting with someone this morning who was so worried about being a single mom, and she was saying, how do I imagine that? Right. And I think you inspire so many people because you can show people a different side of the story where, she was feeling like, how am I going to get through this? And is my life going to be as difficult as it's been thus far? Am I going to have joy? Am I going to have excitement? And somehow it sounds like you thought about it, and then once you decided, you felt like that was it, and you were kind of off to the races. Okay, I'm just going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So I also meet with other women who are thinking about becoming single moms by choice. And I always say, obviously once you start the fertility process, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's like you go 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You don't know how long it
Yeah.
could possibly take. But I have found that for single women that decide to make this decision, it's really the first step that takes the longest because they can't decide. Like I remember being 35 and thinking like, maybe I should really keep dating again before I make this decision. Like maybe I should make this decision at 39 and not 35. Maybe I should give myself more time. But I think with my mom passing away, I had this other influence coming into me that was like, you can get married at any time, but
Yeah.
I don't want to miss the window of being able to have a child if it's something I can do. So I'll say, I guess that's one point. And then the second thing is, when you start telling people you want to do this, most people only are telling people that are married or they're divorced. They don't know other single moms by choice. So they're
Right.
saying to their friends who are married with maybe a partner who's not that helpful, or a divorced mom who went
Right.
into this with a partner, assuming like we're going to do this as a joint entity here. And then, it doesn't work out. So you have these two influences talking to you about a personally lived experience that's really not your experience because you're making a choice to do this on your own from the beginning. You're setting your life up to do it on your own. And I'm happy to share more about kind of things I did, but I don't think it's the same experience because when I talk to other single moms by choice, I get a totally different perspective and
Yes.
opinion than somebody who, has maybe been divorced or is married and doing this and saying like, how could anyone ever want to do this by themselves? Because it's not the same thing. And so I guess I often tell people like, make sure that you get the right perspectives about making this decision because there are definitely hard parts about doing it on your own, but there's also easier parts about doing it on your own. Like you don't have
Mm.
to compromise on your values. You don't have to compromise on your discipline style.
Right.
You can, I moved from Houston to New York in the course of the first 6 weeks of my daughter's life without having to really check with anybody. But then there's harder parts. Like I can't just run to Target whenever I want. Like there's not always somebody at my house,
Mm-hmm.
I don't always have someone to bounce ideas off of about big decisions I have to make for my family and my daughter. So yeah, I think I think in every family structure, there's easier things and there's harder things, but I do think it's a stigma or a misconception that because you're doing it on your own, that it's necessarily harder, at least in my experience or my perspective.
Yeah. I think that that's so important for people to think about because I remember years ago when I started working with Jane Mattis from Single Mothers by Choice. We worked together for many, many, many years, and she was on this podcast. And at that time, so many people were just really starting to think about this. It wasn't as popular as it is now. And people would look at the research, and the research, as you pointed out, was really done on divorced women.
Right.
And so people would feel so discouraged because that single parenthood came from a heartbreak. It didn't come from a place of joy or desire. And so it's a whole different story. And I think in some ways, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but in some ways, when you plan to do this on your own, that's your life, right? Just like a person who has one child probably doesn't know what it's like to have 6 kids, right? Or
Right.
vice versa, right? That's your life.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And, I also think, I know you're a therapist as well. Like I'm a really big proponent of mental health and have really invested in going to therapy now, like through this experience. At the beginning, I wasn't doing it. And I think if I could go back, I would have started when I was pregnant and not like 2 years after I had my
Mm-hmm.
daughter, because there are these, like, I think they're called like invisible scripts that you tell yourself when you're a single mom by
Yes.
choice. Like I made this decision to have my daughter on my own. So I feel a little bit uncomfortable asking other people for help sometimes because I feel like they're
Hmm.
thinking, again, this is a projection, but they're
Yeah.
thinking, well, you chose to do this by yourself, so you shouldn't ask for help. Meanwhile, my sister
Wow.
who's married doesn't have
And she's
any
right.
problem asking for help.
Right.
So it's like, well, that's not actually true. No, like you're projecting someone's thinking that, but that may not actually be the truth. And so I think there's like, again, similar to what, I shared before, just about like there's different types of hard or different types of challenges that come up in every family structure. I think the ones I deal with or I work with or I work on are some of these like invisible scripts that come up or new things that come up that I'm like, oh, I never thought of how I would handle that or how I would answer that or how I would approach that. And again, it's like having this community of single moms by choice and the account, which I think is so helpful, is amazing because then you can ask people who actually are living that, not people who
Yes.
are, they're choosing this versus like it's by circumstance or it happened to them. So
Right.
that's like, I guess, a lesson learned I've had through this.
Would you mind sharing some of those invisible scripts that I think probably other people have as well?
So I think I've had different ones at different times. So when I was deciding to become a single mom, I came from like a very traditional family. My parents were married for 40 years. And then turns out it's funny, I would have a daughter on my own. My sister's gay, her and her partner have two donor conceived children. So I always say we're sort of like the modern family.
Yes.
How things turned out. It's like, how did we turn out with these family structures from where we came from? But
Right.
because we had parents who were just very like open and accepting of who we were and the lives that we want
Nice.
to live. When I was thinking about doing this, my main thing was like, I had such a wonderful dad. Like, am I depriving my daughter of a father by not trying to like do this more traditionally? So that was one that I really had to work through of like, okay, I'm really deciding at this point between potentially like not having a child at all or bringing a child into like a different family structure. But that's one that like I do think about and I've done a lot of like research and reading on just of like she may have feelings about that in the future, and how to validate those feelings, but also not feel shame around the reason I decided to do this in the first place, if that makes sense. But almost like separating my feelings and her feelings, because she may have feelings about that. She may not. I don't know. Like I can't predict the future. So
You can't, right?
so I've sort of had to think about those things. I think I shared the one about just the asking for help, like, oh, I don't think I should ask for help as much because I chose to do this. So like maybe
Mhm.
even like acknowledging the really hard moments, like the parts where you're sick, like that's one of the hardest times being single mom by choice when you're sick because
Yes.
you don't have another person in the house. You feel you don't want to invite someone else over and get them sick. But I think like just being able to like verbally say like, this is a really hard moment right now.
Mhm.
This like sucks sometimes. Like this is hard.
Yes,
Like every parent says that, whether they're
for
married
sure.
or not, like, and it's not
Mhm.
because you're necessarily a single mom by choice that you're saying that. And so those are like some of the things that I feel like I've had to really kind of process or work through to say like, it's okay to say it's hard sometimes because it is,
Yes.
but
Yes.
yeah, so I'd say those are some big ones. And then, starting to feel comfortable telling our story. Like my daughter's getting into school now. I'm like
Mhm.
the teacher about the fact about our family structure so that they're communicating kind of similar messages in school and that sort of thing. Practicing those things I think have been really helpful. I talk to people
Mhm.
about that all the time. Like, when you go announce that you're having a child on your own at work, like probably do that with either your therapist or a couple of friends before you walk in and then do it in front of a whole team of
Right.
people so that you feel confident and you share what you want to share and you don't overshare.
Right. That's great. Yeah. So important.
But the same thing for like different things that come up, like, oh, I'm going to want my daughter to be able to share, different parts of her story and at different times to feel comfortable. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to talk about that specifically, but also I'm curious because I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. How do you, or would you advise people when they have these fears and like, how am I going to handle going to school? How am I going to handle asking for help? Am I going to feel embarrassed? Am I going to feel ashamed? How do I get over the guilt of not having a father? Like all
mhm,
these things, any one of those things can stop somebody, right? They can
exactly.
moving down this path and then all of a sudden they're stopped by this negative thought and they say, okay, I can't do it, or it slows them down and they put it on the shelf and they don't want to deal with it. So how would you say is, I mean, maybe there are several, but how would you say would be a helpful way for people to get on the other side of that?
So this is so funny you're asking this. So I guess it was 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now, I wrote this solo mom workbook, and
Oh,
it's on Amazon, but it actually, like, it has a lot of like the tips and transactional things, like how do you choose a donor and all those things. But a lot of it is these like reflection pages, because exactly what you said and what I said first, like these speed bumps before you even begin are actually like what slow you down the fastest. So
mm,
when I do the coaching session, I'll often spend the most time like figuring out what the limitation is. So people have different ones. So sometimes it's financial, like I don't make enough money, my job is too intense, I couldn't do this on my own. Okay, put that. But I usually try to identify which one it is, because usually people have one leading one. So it's
oh,
like a financial, it's the shame around like I don't think it's right that my child isn't going to have a father. The biggest one is like, this is not how I thought my life would go. And I'm not willing to release the dream of what I thought my life would be for a different
mm,
type of life. And so I think the most important thing is to actually say it out loud. The first step is like, most people don't want to say it out loud. It's like they're embarrassed, or like if they say it out loud, it means it's real to them, maybe. And
mm-hmm,
so saying it out loud, and then what I did is I had a journal, and in my solo mama workbook, I have these like pages of people to journal, of just like getting it out of your head. And then I usually just tell them like, get it out of your head and just let it sit for a little while. Like just let it be out there.
mm-hmm,
And then I usually say, like, what is the alternative? Again, it's like when you think, and I think it's like this thing about, I don't know if it was my mom passing away or what, but like if you fast forward your life, are the things that are getting in the way of you starting like big enough to change like your end result? So like I feel scared that people will judge me for doing it this way. Let's just say that's one of the fears.
mm-hmm,
Well, when I'm 62 laying in my deathbed, I don't care more about what Diane from work thinks about my family structure than the
mm-hmm,
fact that I have like two beautiful daughters sitting next to me, like talking to me about the life that I've lived and the experiences I've shared. And
right.
so I don't know. I think that's been like one of my biggest things is like, what is that thinking? This is like a leadership principle. It's like present forward, or have you ever heard of this? It's like how people think is either present forward or future back. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Most people think present forward, which is like they can't think past the next month. But when you think future back and you think like, what type of life do I want to have? And what would need to be true in the next few years to create that type of life? I think it makes like the big things small and the small things big.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting. I think another thing that people worry about, and I think, you just started to talk about this too, that gets people stuck, which I hear a lot of, is about the child. Like, as you mentioned, is it not fair to not have a partner? And this, by the way, happens with single men by choice, right? Also,
Right.
like, if I don't have a partner, if I'm alone, if there's only one parent, what if something happens to me? There's no second parent. Is my child going to feel deprived? Is my child going to feel like there's not two parents? I should have two parents like everybody else. Their friends are going to tease them. All of this stuff, like projecting about how the child's going to feel, when in reality, we don't know, right, how the child's going to feel, right? We have no idea. Some kids, I always say, some kids will say to their parents, oh, I can't believe it's time to go to bed. You must hate me. It's so terrible. And another kid might say, all right, I'm going to go to bed. Doesn't
Right.
matter. And then the third kid might say, boy, my parents really love me because they want me to have a good night's rest, right?
Right.
So you don't know, right? And so, but there's all this fear around, I'm going to ruin my child.
Yes. How people say this to me all the time too. This is like, I'd say what in the fear, I have this like circle in the book. I have this circle of fears. This is one of the ones
Oh,
that get in the way of people. I guess I think of like a few things. So I grew up, I would say, in a very healthy, traditional, really healthy family. Like there was no a great family. I'm also in therapy for things that I want to work on to do differently with my daughter, right? Like to live differently. I think like no matter who you are, any family structure you have, like there's going to be things that your kids maybe wish were different in the future or not, like you said, or not, or they're going to say, wow, this was such a great place to live. There was not really any chaos in our family. We didn't have any dysfunction because there wasn't constant fighting. Like I think
Right.
of, I have friends who are married that are going through like really difficult marital times right now where there's like constant conflict and like the kids are witnessing things that you'd probably never want
Yes.
your kid to witness. And I don't know if they're better off because they were in a two-parent household. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's
Yes.
how I think about it. Like there's not, I think once you release this idea that like there's not a perfect story or a perfect family, then
Mm-hmm.
any family can be great. And
Yes.
that's how I think about it. Because even if I had chosen to get married and have my daughter with my husband or, whatever, there's no guarantee that we wouldn't have ended up getting divorced at some point or
Right.
something
Yeah.
could happen or that you don't know. And just like you said, it's like, I think there's like a common theme often with single moms by choice where like you have people that are often very high achievers. I think sometimes maybe have like undiagnosed anxiety, like they like to have a plan for everything. They like to project into the future. And then they're almost taking like way too many steps forward because if they were, again, doing this married, they wouldn't be doing all of this. Like they probably wouldn't have like need to think about 3,000 steps before taking step one.
Yes. Right.
You kind of like put yourself in a different bucket when you do it this way, I think. That
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's like, okay, take a step back. Really, what do you need to know to be able to like go forward? And I always say like any parent, honestly, not just single moms, like, do you have stability in your life? Are you mentally stable? Are you financially
Mm-hmm.
stable? Are you in a place that you feel like you're surrounded by support? Whether I was married or not, I would want to be raising my daughter in a community. Like even if you're married and you don't have people that you can depend and rely on, I think parenthood would be really lonely and scary.
Yes.
And I think it's true as a single mom by choice too. It's like you have to create those communities and people that you care about to be able to rely on and to confide in through this chapter of life.
Yes, 100%. And I think it's also for some people, as you said, who I grew up in a traditional family myself, but where I lived, even though it was decades ago, many decades ago, where I lived, there were a lot of gay families, but this was the 60s in Greenwich Village, right? And so if you just step outside of that little area, you wouldn't see gay families. And
Right.
so for me, growing up, I always kind of felt like there's lots of ways to build a family. And I think very often when you grow up in a traditional area or traditional household, you kind of think that that's the gold standard, that
Mhm.
there's no other way to build a happy family. And I think all of us need to kind of get past that so we can see there's lots of ways to build your family, right? There's
Right.
just so many ways to build a family. And it doesn't mean that you're going to have a happier family, as you said, because you're a Dick and Jane sort of couple from the
Yeah.
1950s.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. I think in our family structure that I think something that's unique and something I do with my daughter all the time is I proactively point out different families all the time. And
that's great.
it's much easier because of the family structure we're in. So like I said, my sister and her wife are
Mhm.
a same-sex couple. They have two
Yes,
beautiful kids who are also donor conceived. So like my daughter's seeing like, oh, I say all the time, every family is different and every family is wonderful. Some families have
right,
a mom and a dad, and I go through the whole like at this point I probably say too many. Like some families have two grandparents. Like it's like
right.
it doesn't stop.
Yes, right.
But it's nice. And I think for my daughter too, like the fact that she has two first cousins who are also donor conceived, she'll be able to, they'll be able to have that experience to talk about like how do they feel about that and how are they thinking about like approaching, if they ever want to meet the donor in their family or that
Mhm.
sort of thing. But I think because there's already, I guess, two family structures that are outside of the quote unquote norm within our immediate family, I think she doesn't right now. I think she thinks there isn't a norm yet because
That's
she hasn't
great.
been exposed, to
Yeah,
other things. And, we have single moms by circumstance in our family. My other first cousin and his wife have chosen not to have children. So I'll say, sometimes people get married and they don't want to have kids. Some people don't want to have kids. They just want to be married with their partners. I think it's a beautiful time to be alive because growing up, like my parents didn't have any gay friends. If they had single parent households, it was mostly because there was like a traumatic
Divorce.
separation or
Or death.
divorce or death. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think it's a really beautiful thing to like, for her to grow up in a time where it's like, it's not like an outsider as much. It's like in our day-to-day life that she's
It's
seeing,
great.
different types of different types of families.
That's great. And I think, it's what's so nice about all these things that you're doing, Trisha, is you kind of help people normalize this. And I think ultimately that's going to make the parent so much calmer when they talk to the child, right? They're not going to feel anxious. I
Yeah.
have a colleague who's a lesbian mom, and she and her partner had kids decades ago. And one of her daughters would say, "Am I ever going to have a dad? I don't really understand." She said, "No, but you're never getting a pony either." So,
Oh my
so
God.
imagine your beautiful future. You're snuggling with your child. You feel so connected to them. Your friends and family are so happy, and you have everything that you've ever wanted. I want this for you too, but I want more than that. I want you to feel secure knowing that you've made the best decisions, not just short term, but long term for your future family. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're choosing a donor, choosing a clinic, learning how to talk to your donor conceived child about their origins, all of these decisions will have wider implications for your future. And I want you to have the right resources so you can feel empowered and confident at this very important time in your life. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Building Your Family. It's the only expert-guided platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine. We provide unique strategies that you won't find anywhere else to make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed. And that's why our approach is about offering practical and actionable steps that you can use right now. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into your process, Building Your Family is here to guide you with expert advice, specialized education, stress reduction strategies, and a community to support you every step of the way. We can't wait to see you inside.
When I was going through the process, there was only one other account that I could find that was Single Mom by Choice on Instagram.
Wow.
And I didn't really know who to reach out to. Like I wasn't, I had the woman who was my executive coach, but she had become a single mom by choice through adoption. So I really wanted to
Right.
meet somebody who had
Different.
donor conception. And I was really grateful to meet this woman from Instagram. And then about a year later, a good friend of mine who was a fitness influencer on Instagram was like, "I think you should start an account for Single Mom by Choice. One, you have like a really weird personality. I think people are going to follow you." I'm like, "Is that a compliment?"
What does that mean? Right.
And I was like, "Okay." And then I thought, yeah, you know what? I'll just post things that I wish somebody had posted for me. And like, I wanted to also just kind of highlight some of our life. If you follow my account, I usually do like blur my daughter's face out just because I want her to decide if she ever wants to be on the account. So it's see things that we're doing, but I don't necessarily post her as often. I was like, you know what? I want people to see like this can be a really beautiful life. And I also think once you make the decision to do it, a lot of the fears that I had before, I don't even think about anymore because I'm just like so grateful that I got to do this in this lifetime. Like if I think about my mom's generation or my grandparents' generation, this wouldn't have even it would have been so socially like not acceptable that people probably would never have been able to make the jump.
Yeah.
But just from like a science standpoint, like not even science, like a financial standpoint, women couldn't even have credit cards before,
Right.
so it's
Right.
like this may not have even been a real
A
choice.
possibility.
And
Right.
so I just think like, wow, what a blessing it is to be alive at this time in history and have, the education and the opportunity that I've had to be able to really be able to do this alone with joy.
That's wonderful. What a great perspective, Trisha.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, really great. So, would you mind sharing with people also a little bit about how this worked for you? Like how you decided, you mentioned that you decided to use donor conception rather than adoption. And then I guess the next step was you had to find a doctor and find a donor. What were your thoughts about that as you were moving forward?
Initially, I thought, how would I want to become a mom? And like I said, my first preference was I wanted to experience pregnancy. So I had also thought about like foster to adopt and adoption as a
Mm-hmm.
potential pathway that in the future I might even consider like later down the line. potentially if I decide I want to like have more kids later on in life. But at the time I started, I was 34. I knew I wanted to experience pregnancy. And I had just done a lot of different research, like one around like foster to adopt. A lot of people talk about, and I'm sure you know this, just like with foster care, like one of the main values is reunification. Like the ideal person
Hmm.
is that the child would reunify with the parent if it was possible. And if not, then the child could stay with you. And I knew like that I don't know if I was aligned with the value of that
Yes.
because I wanted to
You wanted to parent.
have a child forever. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't think maybe foster to adopt isn't a good path for me then because I'm not sure I'm aligned with like really what the ideal situation is. Adoption was actually really expensive. So I looked into that as well. And the cost was a bit prohibitive for me at the
Hmm.
time to even, and I had like and I wanted to experience pregnancy, but I started to think like if pregnancy didn't work for me, would adoption be an affordable option for me just because I knew the cost was higher? So when I got to donor conception and I was 34, I did all of my testing to make sure everything was fine. And it was. And I had a really, like, I went through IUIs to get pregnant. I didn't even have to do IVF. So it was like a really affordable
That's
process
great.
for me at the time that I did it, because I was, I think, younger. So it wasn't, I didn't have any fertility challenges.
And by the way, how did you decide? Because this is such a crucial thing that you just mentioned that people don't think about when very often they think, okay, well, I'm going to get sperm, I'm going to try it home or
Oh, yeah.
what have you. I think that was so insightful to think, okay, I'm going to get all my testing done first, make sure everything's working right before I start this. How did that occur to you?
So I have this life perspective of like just do one step at a time. If I think about too many steps, I like can't even take one. So at the
Hmm.
time I was like, I'm not ready to actually like start getting pregnant, but I at least want to just see like what do my numbers look like. And I often tell people like just schedule the consultation and get your baseline testing done.
Yes.
That can sometimes
Yes.
take 6 months. Like you think you're just gonna walk in and it'll start. It's never like that.
Right.
So yeah, so I was like, let me just go in and see what their recommendation is. And so I went in. At the time, I thought I would only want to have one child, and now I'm back thinking like maybe I want to have more than one child.
Hmm.
But at the time, I thought I'm going to have one child. If I ever want to have more, I'll figure that out later. But I really didn't think I would want to have more than one. So I thought IUI is very affordable at the time. Everything was way more affordable 6 years ago than it is today, by the way, I'll say. But
Yes.
so I went to the fertility clinic, went through the IUI process. I think the first time I got pregnant on my fourth IUI, and then I had a pregnancy loss, which was, I would say, another really hard thing to go through as a single. It's really
Oh,
weird for
yes.
everyone, but as a solo mom, I think thinking about going back into the pregnancy process again, I would do things differently. Just having experienced that, like who goes to what appointments with you, like things that could happen and what you find out and that sort of thing.
You
So
mean you would have someone come with you to your appointments or?
yeah, I think for the big ones, like when I found out I had a pregnancy loss, it was at my like the first not anatomy scan. It's like the 13-week appointment where they basically you go in and they're doing like the initial one, and there wasn't a heartbeat for the baby.
Oh gosh.
I thought I was in the clear. Like I'd already found out the sex of the baby. I was like starting to tell people, and then it just
Wow.
didn't work out. And it was again, it's like you don't think when you are so excited to get started, you don't think of all the things that might not go right.
Mhm.
So like again, thinking about the mental health side of things, like I would like to like probably be talking to a counselor if I was going through this again
Mhm.
throughout the whole time, just because a lot of feelings come up and like
And that's, like, devastating, right?
it's so devastating. And yeah, it was terrible. But I tried again really quickly and ended up getting pregnant the very next month. 2 months later, I got pregnant again. Same
Wow.
process. So it was traumatic, but then exciting. But then, then you go through another pregnancy where I thought, oh gosh, could something happen? And always feeling nervous and
Scary.
that. Yeah.
And so do you feel like you would what would you do differently about that?
I would have probably 2 to 3 people that I would have in my corner through the whole pregnancy process. So like either to come to an appointment with, even if they don't come in the room, they just come and sit in the waiting room. People that I deeply trust so that if something did go wrong or even if everything went right, it's like you have someone to like actually say out loud what you're thinking or what your fears are, rather than
Mhm.
kind of holding them in, and then they come out in
Yes.
different ways, or they turn into anxiety, like all the other things
Right.
that happen when you're not really fully talking about the issues that are coming up through this.
Mhm.
So that would be one thing. And then another thing I think about now, which I would never change anything because I have my daughter and I would never change who she is. And that's how she came into the world. But I think if I had done IVF first at 34,
Mhm.
it would have given me a lot more opportunities at 40 to get pregnant without it's just harder as you get older, just because your egg
Yes.
quality goes down. And like at 34, I really wasn't thinking about having another one. And I'm 40 now, and I am thinking about having another one. And, it's like you really probably have to do IVF, and you're not going to get as many eggs, and you're not going to get as many quality eggs. I could have had, a whole set of embryos probably for the future. So I think if
Right.
I could go back in time and I did not know my daughter existed yet, I probably would have done IVF first.
You would have her and then other embryos.
I'd have other embryos that I could have
Mhm.
decided to transfer later.
Mhm.
But that's not how it was supposed to happen, I know that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so I don't it's
Mhm.
not like but if I at the time, I was like, I felt like the fertility clinics try to push you into IVF because it's more expensive and they can make more money on it. So I always thought like IUI, if you're young and you're doing this, IUI is like the easiest, most affordable option because you're not, you don't have to spend as much money. But with IVF at certain clinics, it can be really expensive, especially if you don't have insurance that covers.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, very expensive. But as you said, long term, if you want more than one child, it might make sense
Right.
to do that. It might make sense in terms of the cost even.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you think about, like, the cost of sperm, and you think about the cost of each IUI if you're doing it at a clinic, which is what I did. I mean, it does start to add up over time, as
Right.
opposed to, like, you kind of like, with IVF, you typically need 2 vials, just in case, and then 1 vial could be used multiple times.
Yes.
So it's just in the long run, it's probably actually more affordable than doing the IUIs if
Mhm.
you end up having to do several to get pregnant.
Right, right, yeah, and I think that and we've talked about this before in the podcast, that doctors don't really know that yet. They're not really thinking, "Well, you're a single mom by choice.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at the time, the cost of sperm," because you can go back and then, of course, as you get older, if it takes more cycles, you're gonna order more sperm. The sperm's not free. So in their minds, maybe the way that they're thinking is almost like for a heterosexual couple,
Exactly.
where the sperm's free, right? But if you compute all of these things into that system, then in the end, it may make sense to advise single moms by choice to consider IVF in the beginning.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
I also think, like, what age, and again, like, when I meet with people, I always tell them I'm not a doctor, like, ask your doctor, because I don't ever wanna be giving, like, medical advice. But I just talk about, like, the statistics, because oftentimes insurance companies will require you to do 6 IUIs before they'll pay for IVF. But if you
Right.
do the math, like, if a vial of sperm is $1,000, okay, so now you have $6,000 plus another 6,000, 6, probably more than that. It's usually, I think it's like $1,300 for each IUI. Then, okay, now you're actually at a place like CNY Fertility, which is one of the most budget conscious
Mhm.
providers in the US right now. I think it's like $7,000 for the IVF process. So you could have had 2 rounds of IVF where you could have gotten a whole bunch of embryos than having done all of these IUIs. So
Right.
it's like you really do have to weigh it, because oftentimes when you're first starting, you sort of just listen to what the doctors are saying, because, but I think it's worth taking a step back and just doing like a pro forma on this of
Mhm.
the best way to do it.
Well, the system is different, right? The way the doctor's thinking is I do step one, then step two. If step two doesn't work, then I do step three, right? Whereas a single mom by choice needs to also think about, I've got to think about step three now
Yeah,
and what it's going to cost me financially. Just do the math, because that just procedural way of thinking about things doesn't work for single moms by choice, right? The
exactly.
sperm's not going to be free. And as you said, many states still will put you in a situation where, this outdated idea of having to prove that you're infertile and have
Right,
6 IUIs, which is crazy,
right.
but it happens. And so, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Another thing like that I had to really advocate for myself for during the IUI process is most people who are going in to have IUIs at a clinic are going because they have had trouble getting pregnant. So they're like putting you on they're like, you should go on progesterone. Like they're trying to put you on all these drugs. And I remember I was like, well, I don't want to be on any of the drugs because you told me all my levels were completely normal. So with my daughter, I didn't do any drugs at all
Mm.
or anything because I'm like, well, yeah, if people have progesterone drops when they're, trying to conceive a pregnancy, then the pregnancy won't work. But if you have no progesterone issues, why would you be putting extra progesterone in your body? You know what I mean?
Well, you need it after IVF because your body
Well,
will.
yeah,
Right.
IVF, but for IUI,
Right.
you don't need it. For IVF, you do because you have because it's like you know, it's like a different, they're having to like transfer it in versus IUI, it's like they're just releasing the sperm into your uterus
Mhm.
at
Mhm.
right ovulation time. So
Yeah.
there were all of these like additional, I forget there were a couple other things they wanted me to take. And to me, I just didn't think it made sense because I was like, I don't have any fertility issues though. I'm here because I don't have a partner and I don't know why I would need to do that. And then they were like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We can do unmedicated IUIs. That's like people do that all the time. That's completely fine. But that wasn't necessarily the protocol.
So you have to be your own advocate in a lot of ways,
Exactly. And
right?
I think reminding people every time, because even when you go to the doctor, like I remember, like the doctor would say, is your husband here? Or and again, I think that's another thing too. It's like, well, how do you know I have a husband? Like, what is your
Right.
partner? Right? Like there's so many things
Yes.
I think that could be like training in the medical world just to make it more inclusive for people that might not have like a traditional structure. But
Mhm. Well, the Human Rights Campaign does offer training. And so hopefully more and more fertility clinics will participate. It's kind of become very important over time and more clinics are doing it, but it should be at some point a standard
right.
to use the right language to understand how to talk to people to think about. But these things that we're talking about now aren't things that necessarily people are always going to think about. So I think in the end, we do also need to advocate for ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And what about your donor? How did you decide? Do you think that being a single mom by choice influenced who you chose as a donor?
Yeah. So in my day job, I do a lot of work in like human resources and hiring, but this is going to
Mhm.
sound really strange, but I've probably interviewed in my life like over probably 2,000 people. I'm not kidding, just because
Mhm.
a lot of like
Yeah.
teacher recruitment and that sort of thing. So I feel like I have a really good gauge of just like energy. When I meet someone, I'm like, okay, what's their vibe? Like, who are they? I always try to like kind of get to their core. And so when I've heard so many different things of how people pick donors, my main decision was so most of the banks that you go through, they have a 5-minute recorded interview that you can listen
Mhm.
to. So I went through like all the photos of people that I think like it just spoke to me in a way. And then I listened to like every single interview, like a podcast. Like I would put it on my headphones and I would walk and I would listen and
Mhm.
I would think in my head, 18 years from now, my daughter's going to could have coffee with this person. Would I want to have coffee with this person after listening to them talk for 5 minutes?
Mhm.
And if the answer was no, they were off. And
Mhm.
the donor I picked, I just really liked his energy. I thought he seemed really kind and authentic and genuine and smart. And I used an open donor so that you never know what's really going to happen. But at the time of his donation, he said that he'd be open to having
Contact.
contact with the offspring of his
18.
offspring when they turn 18. So that was my main thing. And then, of course, like the health, they do the health history. So, as I mentioned, my mom passed away of colon cancer. I wanted to make sure that whoever I picked did not have a history of colon cancer in their family. That was my main thing. It was really more of like the interview. Now, my sister and her wife, I don't even think they listened to the interviews. So it's just so funny, like what you're looking for.
Mhm.
I think it's so different for everybody. But what's interesting is I think I shared with you in a different call, I'm connected to all of her half siblings through a Facebook group. We kind of joke because it's like there must be something similar with all of us that we
Right.
would have all picked the same. There's something about us that's also similar why we would have picked the same person. And that experience has just added so much more love and joy to my life. It is getting to meet the parents of my daughter's half siblings and being connected to them. And we've met three of her half siblings at this point, which has been really exciting.
And what is it, because I think people will be interested to hear this. What is it about meeting the other parents and the siblings that brings you all this love and joy?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I guess I'll answer it two ways. So I think like 18 years from now, my daughter's going to know a lot more about all of these other people that are walking around the universe for a number of
Mhm.
reasons. But I just think it's like more family, more love for her. Like I think about, I
Oh.
have a sister who I'm really close with. And, like I also have family members who I'm not that close with. And I grew up with them too. And I just think like down the road, she'll probably have like adult friendships with a lot of these kids potentially. And maybe not with some other ones that I think is just a beautiful thing in general. Just like
Mm.
the more I think this world it can be just a crazy place. And I think the more connections that you have of people who love you or know you or are out there. So I guess that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I've listened to quite a few podcasts and read a lot online of like the voices of donor conceived adults and what they wish was different when they were growing up, or things that they would advocate for in this like world of donor conception. And one of the biggest things is that most of them say, I wish I had met my half siblings younger. I wish that I had the opportunity to know them when I was growing up. And it's something I read over and over and over again.
Hmm.
And I just thought, yeah, like I think about, I'll use an example of like first cousins growing up. We had cousins who we met probably like 4 or 5 times during growing up. And we've like reconnected as adults at weddings because we had that at least like initial connection as kids to just at least know who each other are.
Mhm.
And I think if you don't have that in childhood, it is a bit harder to maybe connect as adults sometimes. Maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, I just think like I hope it's part of the experience when she gets older that she'll say like, yeah, I know all of the reported pregnancies at least. I know all of the kids that are out there that their parents have reported the pregnancies, and I know who they are, I know where they live, and I have contact with the ones who want to have contact with me. And I think, I don't know, I love that. I think there's something special and unique about it.
That's so nice. That's beautiful. And, the research I don't know if you've read, Rosanna Hertz's book about finding donor siblings and her research on
No,
it.
no, I have to
Yes.
write that
Yeah,
down.
it's
Yeah.
called Random Families. She was on the podcast, so you can listen to
Oh,
her
I'll listen to
here.
her too. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of, solo parents find that it's really is particularly nice for them, not just because, they have these siblings, but as you pointed out earlier, you also have the opportunity to meet other children who are donor conceived. And
Mm-hmm.
so you meet siblings, but you also meet these kids who are donor conceived. And so you have both of those reasons
Yeah.
where it's so nice for you to have that connection. And sometimes they stay, sometimes they don't, but it's really nice to be able to have that experience at some point in your life, whenever that's
Yeah.
going to be.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting in our family group. I hadn't really thought about this that much, but the kids that I've met, two are twins. There's twin brothers, and then there's a sister that we've met, and they're both the two families that we've connected with in the family are also single moms by choice.
Yes. Wonderful.
So that's been really interesting too, just like their experiences and what's the same and what's different and what are their struggles and what are their joy. Like it's nice to meet, and then knowing that you also have a connection that these are your daughter's half siblings just kind of adds like another layer to it.
And I'm sure it's wonderful to see, like, also other single moms in their life doing the same things you're doing,
Yeah.
still, having trouble when the bouncy seat breaks or the babysitter calls in sick, or, you look in the fridge and there's nothing for dinner, and,
Oh,
whatever it is
yeah.
that happens, right? So it's great to have a community.
It's really great. And I think in this generation, like we've become such a disconnected society in general. And I often say, like, the reason I always say solo mama instead of single mama or single mom by choice, I typically say solo mom, is because I think sometimes the word single equates with alone. I just don't think anyone should be doing parenting alone. Like, I'm doing it solo. Like, I'm raising my daughter as a solo mom, but I'm raising her in a community of friends and family and people and neighbors. And I think that is such a key to like having a positive parenthood experience. And
Hmm.
especially
Interesting.
as a solo mom too, like, one day I am going to die. And I think sometimes when you have a one parent and one child, you can have this like really deep bond, which I do think I have with my daughter, but I want her to have more than just me in her life. I want her to have
Yes.
so many other people that if God forbid something did happen, I know you asked that in the beginning. That's one of my biggest fears is like, what if something happened to me? What would happen? But I feel like I try to be really intentional about where we live and who's around her and the relationships that she has, that her life is bigger than just me and her community is bigger than just us. And so I'd say that's like an intentional set of actions I do every like I really try to do that because I think it's going to be really important down the line.
Well, I think that's so valuable. I mean, not just, if you're a solo mom, but I think for any parent, because, lots of times when you're in a situation where you feel isolated, your family is kind of this island, in whatever way, and you may be very insular and close to your parents, but then there could potentially be anxiety for the kids because they haven't seen an
Right,
example of their parent reaching out and connecting with other people and developing communities and being out there in the world. And so the children don't learn that. And
right.
so not only does your child have these connections, but they also see you doing it. And that's a beautiful thing because now she has had modeling for that and knows how to do that on her own.
Exactly. And I think that I think about like going back to what you asked in the beginning, like how do you get over these humps and all these things? It's like at the end of the day, like we only get this one life. And I mean, maybe there's more after this or whatever, but we have this one life. And like,
Yes.
I don't know how to say this, but it's like, don't live smaller than you have to live because you're so worried about what everyone else is going to think. Because at the end of the
Right.
day, like I think about what I did and my family and my daughter, and I can't imagine if I had like let somebody get in the way of that or like let fear get in the way of like amazing experience,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hope for other people that they can get past that if they can get over it because like what's on the other side is just amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's beautiful, Trisha. Really beautiful. And I think that's a good place for us to wind down. Is there anything else that you want people to know? And where can people reach you?
So as I mentioned before, I have an Instagram account called at the Solo Mama. So you can follow along on Instagram. If you want to see me dancing around in my family room or making some random thing for
That's
dinner for my
great.
daughter, you can follow along there. Just I think like I said community I think is such a core value of mine and it's really the catalyst of the solo mama community and the platform and everything. It's really just creating a group of people that can connect and ask for help and share their life and their story and like you said normalize that there's so many different family structures out there and that everyone is beautiful in their own way.
That's beautiful. And I would like to add that kind of the nitty gritty of life you show very openly, which I really appreciate because all of those things are things that people do worry about, right? How am I going to, make dinner on Sunday night and have like leftovers for the next 3 days if I'm just by myself, whatever it might be, right? I mean, those are the real things that people think about. How am I going to do this? So I really appreciate you being so open with your home and your family because I think you provide this beautiful example for so many people.
Thank you. Well, and I'm so grateful to meet you too. I love, like I said, starting the platform, I feel like I've met people I never would have met. And I think that's like the point of life anyway, is that we're all here for a reason and a season and we get to meet people through these, like points of connection in life that until you create the place for people to come to, it's really hard for people to know kind of where to find information or who to talk to.
Mm.
So thank you
Mhm.
too for what you do and your platform and all of the amazing podcasts that you're putting out. I think it's really great for especially for this community.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And all of you who are listening to this, I'm sure you can see now why I started saying that you're going to feel very warmly towards
Oh,
Trisha by the end of this because she's so wonderful. We're so grateful to have her. And I'm also so grateful that you tuned in because we really need this community so much. We really want you to have an easier path to parenthood and a better parenting experience. That's why we're here. That's why we keep showing up. So please help us by subscribing, pushing the subscribe button, and come back next week. We're really excited to see you and give you more information every week. Hi, it's Lisa Schumann. I hope that you enjoyed that video and I hope it helped you. And if it did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe because that's how we keep going. It's really important to us. And if you liked it, you might like this one.